Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to WyomingPBS.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator.
A commission headed by co-chairman Erskine Bowles and Senator Alan Simpson laid out a controversial plan to slash the federal deficit by $3.8 trillion.
It's taken a lot of time. It's taken a lot of energy over the last 5 months. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun.
We're all in this huge, bring home the bacon and the pig is dead. I said it before, and the people now who are getting thrown out or will be thrown out are appropriators.
Then, Simpson called Social Security
A milk cow with 310 million tits.
And there were calls for his resignation.
And stop using the deficit as a smokescreen for trying to cut Social Security benefits.
Simpson apologized, and the commission carried on.
We will get something done in this commission, and I think the American people will be proud of it.
We were going to tell the truth. We were going to be real, because the problem was real and all the solutions were painful, and there was no easy way out.
I tell you, if anybody in here believes they're going to get out of this unscathed, we're wrong, and we're not really doing our job.
Getting it done, taking his licks, and keeping it real. The Alan Coy Simpson story.
Anybody who's been in politics has had their skin torn off their body, but if you're successful, it grows back double strength.
One of the great things about Al was he never had any hesitation about telling people exactly what he thought. On more than one occasion, that got him in trouble.
If you have integrity, nothing else matters. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters.
What I found out very, very quickly was that Al Simpson was interested in getting things done for Wyoming, and he was interested in getting things done for the country.
The only reason I ever worked hard was so I wouldn't make an ass out of myself.
We've had a wonderful life, but he was a wild young man.
You're entitled to be called a fool, boob, idiot, bonehead, screwball. That's fair, but never let them distort who you are as a person.
Production of this program was made possible by the generous support of the following. A complete list of supporters is available from PBS.
When retired Wyoming Senator Al Simpson accepted President Barack Obama's invitation to co-chair a commission to cut the federal deficit, few envied him the task. But in a half-century of politics, Al Simpson has relished controversy. In the Senate, he took on untouchable issues like immigration, veterans' benefits, and Medicare, and made loyal friends on both sides of the aisle and in the White House. Tall, funny, combative, and straight-talking to a fault, Washington was charmed, amused, and sometimes offended. You have to look west to Wyoming for clues to what makes Simpson tick. Alan Coy Simpson's ancestors arrived in the West in the middle of the 19th century, before Wyoming became a state. His great-grandfather was the boss farmer on the Wind River Indian Reservation. His grandmother Maggie, known as Nanny in the family, taught there in a Catholic mission school. And his grandfather, Will Simpson, read for the law and practiced his own rough-hewn frontier justice.
Shot the banker in the ear in Matitsi. The banker said, "You know, Will, we don't like Democrats here in Park County," and he bounced the Democrat Party check signed by my grandfather, and my grandfather went in. He said, "Hayes, if you do that again, something bad will happen to you." And old Hayes bounced another one. My grandfather went in and shot pieces of his ear. He had wiles of a cougar and a coyote.
And a short fuse. In another incident, in Cody, Bill shot a cowboy who accosted him over a divorce case.
Bill had a temper. Mom worried about that. So did Nanny when they saw it in Al. Didn't want him to shoot somebody.
Millward Simpson, the son of William and Nanny, and the father of Alan, was an athlete, a bon vivant, and a natural politician, who also got down to the bar now and then.
He resisted prohibition completely. He got to the legislature, and a woman from Hot Springs County said, "Millward Simpson, I know your mother, Maggie Simpson, and I know her as a woman of rectitude and principle and beautiful. And I want to know about you. I want to know, are you wet or are you dry?" And he said, "Lady, I'm so wet, if you blew on me, I'd ripple." Well, I tell you, she went and told his mother.
Millward married Lorna Helen Coy, the daughter of an Illinois family that had come west working for the railroad, and they began raising a family in Cody, Wyoming, a good place for two lively, adventurous boys to grow up. There, the Simpsons weathered the Great Depression of the 1930s.
If you lived in Cody, you bought your melons over in Powell, and you had food, and Dad practiced law, and traded a divorce for a cow, I guess. The barter system was in good order.
And in December 1941, another shock. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The Simpson boys were too young to enlist, but Cody, like every town in Wyoming, made a heart-rending contribution to the war.
The war changed everything in this community. You go to a basketball game because you loved basketball or football and see the Cody Broncs playing the Powell Panthers in 1941, and then you would read 6 months later that the star center had died. I get very emotional about that. And you think, these sons of bitches are killing my football idol and my basketball idol, killing them. They're dying. And then they'd have a service in Cody, and everybody would come, little town, and the passions ran high. Suddenly, in the midst of 42, any guy that could swing a hammer between 20 and 70 was out here in the middle of the prairie between Powell and Cody, putting up the Jap camp.
It was an internment center for Japanese Americans. Barbed wire, tar paper shacks, searchlights, and guards with guns.
We were told there were 11,000 people there. Well, there were only two cities larger than that in Wyoming. That was Cheyenne and Casper. Powell was about 2,500, Cody probably 3,500, and so the people thought, now if those people escape, we'll all be killed. Well, there were 11,000 of them there, and they're going to break out, and they'll come to town, and we'll be dead.
But there was compassion as well as fear in Cody. The Episcopal priest held services at the relocation center, with the Simpson boys often serving as acolytes. And the Boy Scouts from Cody learned that there was a troop at the camp too. And Al Simpson ended up in a tent with Norm Mineta from San Jose, digging a moat to divert rainwater.
Then he said, there's a kid from my troop who I really don't care for just below us here. Would you mind if we cut the water to exit that way? It was really no skin off my nose. So I said, sure. And our moat worked perfectly, and the water drained off down that way. And not too much later, the tent pegs pulled on that tent below us, came down, and this kid in my tent is going, hee, 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 ho, 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 ha, ha, ha. And I kept saying, Alan, would you shut up so we can do, what we were supposed to be doing?
Well, he was a devil, and so was I.
The boys who met in a pup tent at Hart Mountain would be reunited years later in Washington, D.C., when Mineta became a congressman and Simpson a senator. And today they're raising money for an interpretive center at Hart Mountain. But in the 1940s, Pete and Al charted the progress of the war on maps on their bedroom wall, until Al Simpson's 14th birthday.
And then, of course, it was all signed on my birthday. On the battleship Missouri, September 2nd, 1945. The war was over, and my parents were thrilled because their little boys weren't going to go to war.
Pete and Al Simpson entered high school with the usual push and pull of good and bad influences. One of the best influences was Winona Thompson, a Cody English teacher.
She would bring in the Decca record collection of Othello with the original voices of Paul Robeson as Othello, Uta Hagen as Desdemona, and Jose Ferrer as Iago. Shakespeare is still current because it's 400 plus years old. It's about love, hate, lust, destruction, caring. Every human emotion is in Shakespeare somewhere, and every humor. So all these things rattle in your head, and then when you're about to do something, you know damn well it ain't the thing to do. That marvelous phrase, thus conscience doth make cowards of us all, and the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard often go awry and lose the name of action. Now those things stick in your head.
Older brother Pete had always been Alan Simpson's anchor. So when Pete went off for a year at a private high school, his siblings seemed to lose his compass.
We went out and we shot up a mailbox and just put about 72 holes in this one, and in the course of the melee, somebody killed a cow over in the field because these rounds were landing, where we didn't know where they were, landing on some old boy's porch. And we were on federal probation for 2 years. Stupid, idiotic, foolish, ignorant, dumb. And they'd say, how can you explain this? And you'd say, I'll never do it again. Now that would usually work because you didn't mean it.
Family and sports kept Al Simpson on track, but barely. Friends remember him as big, funny, and mischievous. He made it to the University of Wyoming and played football.
I weighed 260, had hair, and thought beer was food. That is not a funny statement, it was real.
But he stayed in school and ran for the university senate, partly because another senator was a student named Ann Scholl.
When we were dating, my big concern was he might have a drinking problem, and that was not part of my life. And so I waited that out a little while and decided that he was salvageable, and he has proved thus. But he was a wild young man.
But nice.
Very nice and kind.
Marriage, the Army, a family, and a law practice in Cody. But always in the Simpson family, politics. Father Millward ran for governor and won.
The old man called me one day and he said, "Come on over." He said, "I got a little area in the back of my office. I think you want to learn a little about politics."
With Al Simpson hiding within earshot, a delegation from northeast Wyoming asked the governor to get the new interstate routed through their town.
And Pop said, "Look, could you say that again so that I'm sure that I got the wax out of my ears?" "Well, Governor, we'll just say that it's so critical to us that we feel that if you can't do this, it'll be very detrimental to you in your reelection, maybe probably defeat you." He said, "I want you sons of bitches to get up and get your ass out of here. Every one of you bastards." Well, God, and then he went even worse than that. He had lyrical profanity, which I inherited. They stormed out with just foul, and God, I stepped out behind that screen and just hugged the old man. I said, "God, Jesus, I love that." He said, "They're going to come at me like the hounds of hell, like the harpies from the cliffs."
Come at him they did. In 1958, Democrat Joe Hickey ousted him from the governor's mansion.
And they told Pop, "Now don't respond to that." And that's where I learned my lesson, that an attack unanswered is an attack agreed to. But I do remember sitting in the Parker Cafe with Ann about a day after the election, hiding, and this couple of cowboys in the booth next to us said, "Hey, we got rid of that bastard Simpson, didn't we?" And the other guy said, "Yeah, who'd we get?" And the other one said, "Who cares?" And that's Wyoming politics.
They weren't rid of Millward Simpson yet. In 1962, he won a seat in the U.S. Senate.
Senator Prescott Bush of Connecticut was just retiring, and his son was there kind of helping him wind up, a fellow named George Herbert Walker Bush, who I met at 1962.
2 years later, back in Wyoming, Alan Simpson began his own political career in the state legislature. It was a part-time citizens legislature that only met a month or two each year, with low pay and no personal staff for legislators.
So the best thing that ever happened to me in public life, I went to the legislature and I was in the minority. Now that's an important place to start. We laughed together, drank together, legislated together, never got into anything that was, didn't have anything to do with Wyoming and doing something right.
He was a legislative craftsman, and as issues would come to him and he would take a hold of them, he loved to work the process, getting people to do what you want them to do. It's the art of persuasion. And heavens knows Al has that in spades, and you could see it in the legislature, you could certainly see it in the Senate. But it all comes down to one human being trying to get another to do what he wants them to do.
A powerful corporate interest in the Wyoming legislature was the Union Pacific Railroad. In the 19th century, UP had been given a checkerboard of property sections across Wyoming by the federal government in exchange for building the Transcontinental Railroad. Now, it was trying to charge mineral owners huge fees for crossing UP land to reach trona deposits.
And I went to Cheyenne with this little 5 or 6 line bill to get introduced, and it allowed corner crossing underground on section corners. And they put it in, and then all hell broke loose.
And the first guy out of the chute was Alan. And a great, big, tall guy, hunched over, exactly. He hadn't changed much in looks. He stood up from his seat and he said, "What's happened here is the Union Pacific is getting greedy. They want it all for themselves." He said, "I was here last time when they passed that bill." And he said, "I'll tell you what they did. They slipped the green weenie to the state of Wyoming." And he took his fingers up in a very interesting gesture.
I think we won by 1 vote. We had a big party, and all the New York lawyers were there, and the LA, and the booze was flowing. And this one guy got up, he had a snoot full. He said, "I want to tell you something. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about country lawyers, like little old country lawyers." He said, "You bastards cleaned our clock," and I don't know, I never seen anything like it in my life. But it was a delightful occasion because they really, in seriousness, they said, you know, you guys had passion. We were just making money.
Simpson made some votes in those days he regretted later, like opposing severance taxes on the energy industry. But in many ways, the Wyoming legislature was the one-room schoolhouse of Al Simpson's early political education.
Staying up late at night, that's the only way I could do it. I had a rule in life. The only reason I ever worked hard was so I wouldn't make an ass out of myself. It was very simple. I'm not a quick thinker. I'm not brilliant. I'm a plodder. But if I can wrap my head around something, I know I can explain it in a way that the average Joe will understand.
Meanwhile, back in Washington, D.C., the man who taught Al Simpson his first lessons in politics, Millward Simpson, was not well.
He said, I'm not going to run again. I can't do it. I'm hurting. I got rheumatoid arthritis and Parkinson's. So they sold their home in Washington on a handshake to a couple who had just been elected to Congress.
And he set the price, and we said, okay, we'll take it. There was no haggling, no negotiation, and no contract, no escrow agreements. But I knew his word was good, and he trusted me, a new congressman, and it was a good deal. I lost money on the house, but that's all right.
And a few years later, George Herbert Walker Bush would greet the next generation of Simpson in Washington, D.C. In 1979, vacationing in Paris,
get a wire from the old man, from Dad. It says, Cliff Hansen announced today at the Wyoming Stock Growers Convention, this was in June, so always in June, that he's not running for the U.S. Senate again. I looked at Ann, and she looked at me, and I went down, got a bottle of wine and a baguette and some goat cheese, and came back and said, here we go, because this is the time.
A Republican senator from Wyoming arrives in Washington, D.C. with some advantages. The state he represents has a small population, mostly Republican, and doesn't ask its Washington representatives to do much but keep the feds at bay. And Wyoming Senator Cliff Hansen retired early to give Simpson seniority over other freshman senators. But Alan Simpson faced some challenges from the get-go in 1979, beginning with his committee assignments.
I got assigned to the Immigration and Refugee Subcommittee, which was Ted Kennedy as chair. I got assigned to the Nuclear Regulation Subcommittee, and Gary Hart was the chair. I got assigned to the A Committee of Veterans Affairs, and Alan Cranston was the chair. Everybody I work with is running for president. I've been there 6 weeks. Get a call from Hart office. He doesn't know me. I mean, here I am, his ranking member. He's the chairman. Said, we need to go to 3 Mile Island, Harrisburg, because there's been a transient. So I got in the helicopter, and I'd been in a lot of helicopters in the Army, but I'd never seen a crappier helicopter in my life. You could see through the floorboards, and it was just a mess. And I said to Hart, you know, now, are you going to make a political hay out of this? He said, what do you mean? He bristled. Well, I said, you know, I understand that, you know, nuclear power isn't exactly your bag. You being a greenie or whatever I said. He said, who told you this stuff? And I said, well, a member of my staff. He said, well, watch me. So we flew around the reactor. Gary used to say that's how Simpson lost his hair. What we were doing flying around the reactor in a helicopter with hardly any floorboards is beyond comprehension. I never saw more media. There were cables, there were people pushing each other, and they wanted to know from Gary and from me. And of course, I'm just standing there like a lump. I don't know zirconium cladding from a Zippo lighter.
After days and days of hearings, Simpson, from a uranium-producing state, and Hart, the greenie, produced a subcommittee report that identified regulatory shortfalls and calmed concerns about the plume. And the press got its first taste of Simpson's turn of phrase.
The Dirksen building in the sunlight gave off more radiation on the marble than was at 3 Mile Island. The plume was about the size of a sparrow fart.
And he could work with Democrats, even when they had White House ambitions.
It also gave me a better view of Gary Hart, who I enjoy very much. I never judge people on their personal, habits.
And when controversy wasn't thrust upon Simpson, well, he went and found it. The Army Corps of Engineers.
These guys are allergic to the sound of running water. They will erect a dam at any water course known to the history. They will call every river in America, including the South Fork and Issaquah Creek, navigable, and I'm tired of them. And so I put in an amendment to cut their budget by 20% across the board. And God, they just tore a hole in me, just blew me out of the water. But this time, they called for the vote, and it was 12-2, just sticking it up my nose. I got in the elevator, and old Muskie, he said, Simpson? I said, yes, Senator. He said, to make it around here, you got to be about half a son of a bitch. And I see you are.
Simpson was energized when he took on sacred cows and difficult issues. As ranking minority and later chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, he went after benefits for non-combatant veterans.
Veterans, yeah, show me the combat veteran, I say write the ticket. Just write the check. Combat theater, anybody, but don't tell me to write the check for some guy served 6 months and never left Camp Beetle Bailey and doesn't know a mortar two from either end. Forget it.
Then there was the Social Security system, another third rail in politics, which didn't faze Simpson.
There's only 2 ways that you save Social Security. The rest of it is BS of the first order. You either increase the payroll tax or reduce the benefits. That's it. There's no other way. And then you should affluence test the benefits.
A fresh voice in Washington, the newspaper said, but not very welcome to veterans groups or the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP.
38 million Americans bound together by a common love of airline discounts or RV discounts and insurance discounts.
And the issue that would most test Simpson's appetite for controversy, his tenacity, and his bipartisan legislative skill? Immigration.
Because that was truly emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. The Statue of Liberty, the huddled masses. You can't cut through that, which is a great part of America, but there is a reality to the fact that the first duty of every nation is to control its borders.
It's not the president's job.
Immigration reform offers a decade-long dance lesson in the steps of legislating, and Simpson's eventual mastery of it. Among the controversial issues in immigration reform were a proposed national identity card to weed out illegal workers, a route to citizenship for some of them, and penalties for employers who hired illegals. In 1984, the bill died when the Reagan administration refused to budge on the price tag of the program. In 1986, Simpson was wiser about wheeling and dealing with the White House and powerful Democrats, like Ted Kennedy.
He wanted a provision that said that if a person came on in here and created some 10 jobs, invested $1 million and created, that they could get passage on into the United States. They'd be able to get green cards to be able to come in and get on the road to citizenship. And I said, I differed with that because I said we should not be permitting individuals to buy their way into the United States, that it ought to be done on the basis of merit. The next year, after this bill failed, the next year we were working out the compromise, and he said, hey, Ted, I need that provision in the bill. And I said, the one I'm against? He said, I need that provision. Get this thing, I'm supporting some of the things you want, I got to get that provision. So I supported the provisions, and up gets Paul Sarbanes. And he said, now, Kennedy, last year you said it ought to be on merits. And I said, I'm going to let Al Simpson handle this response.
Through Attorney General Ed Meese, President Reagan threatened to veto the immigration bill the second time around. Simpson returned fire.
I said, every point where I needed the president's help, I called him and he said, go. And he'll do the same thing here.
So I don't want to hear any of this crap, because I'll tell you, if you do this to me, at this point, with what I've done, you'll never see one shred of legislation come out of the U.S. Senate that has a thing to do with the Justice Department.
Well, there were some things he did that were incredibly valuable. I mean, Simpson-Mazzoli, the immigration bill, is probably, that bears his name, is one of the most famous. When he was making the sausage that's legislation and really working at it, he was a very valuable ally to have for anybody.
The Simpson-Mazzoli immigration law that the president signed in 1986 was a breakthrough, but nevertheless a disappointment.
We were never able to get a more secure identifier because the cry went up from the right and the left that this was a national ID.
The issue remains in many ways unresolved today, except that
every one of these new bills has in it some of the most restrictive identifying language you can imagine. Retina scans and fingerprints, and nobody's written a single damned article about the slippery slope or the national ID. I mean, because of, 9/11.
in those early years, Simpson was a popular figure in Washington.
He was a free spirit when it came to how he conducted himself with people and with the press particularly. He was always good value, you might say, for them, though, because he could get a statement out of him on whatever the question, and he wouldn't run for cover. He'd say, "Here's what I think."
In 1985, just beginning his second term, Simpson ran for the whip job, the number 2 leadership position among Senate Republicans, behind Majority Leader Bob Dole. He would hold the position for a decade, both in the minority and the majority. That sometimes meant serving the larger goals of a Republican president.
I really got to know him better after I became Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, and his number 1 domestic priority was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. Alan was a majority whip, Republican whip at the time, and he worked with us to accomplish that. First time the tax code had been substantially reformed in 100 years, and we reduced the top marginal tax rate from, at that time, I think 50% down to 28%.
Simpson could use his powerful position to influence bills that mattered to Wyoming, like a Wyoming Wilderness Bill and the Clean Air Act in 1990. This included steps to reduce acid rain affecting the Rockies. But like most Wyoming legislators, Simpson was there to help out the energy industry too, by easing sulfur limits on power plants burning Powder River coal.
We have to reduce 15% of sulfur content, and so does Ohio, and ours is lower than Ohio to start with. And I said, it's a rotten thing, and I said, it's totally offensive to me. Well, you can imagine, the greenies just blew me out of the water. Hell, they called me a soot-covered slob. I'd say to my staff, where are they after my ass? Well, the veterans really want a piece of you in Cheyenne. Well, Gillette, they think you're part of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and your history up there. I said, great.
He would come back to the state and get savaged sometimes by people who thought he was wrong on immigration, changing the immigration law, people who thought he was terribly wrong on veterans benefits.
But his willingness to face his detractors and his straight talk made Simpson a very popular figure in his home state.
They let me get away with a lot of things because I had town meetings.
On the campaign trail, he often teamed with Wyoming Representative Dick Cheney.
We formed a lifelong friendship. We campaigned together. It was like a gong show.
I was headed from Lander over to Riverton to be on the morning talk show, a local radio station. As I went through the front door, I noticed there was somebody standing over here to my left. Didn't really see who it was. And I could look through and see a bedroom off over to the right here, and then a baby crawling around on the floor in diapers. Didn't look like a radio station. I turned around, and the person I'd passed as I came in was the woman of the house who was vacuuming the carpet at 9 o'clock in the morning in her nightgown. And she said, "I'll bet you're looking for the radio station, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." She said, "Well, they moved last week." I was embarrassed, obviously, and had to say something to her as I left. So on my way out, I introduced myself to her as her United States Senator Alan Simpson.
Relationships between politicians often wax and wane with the rise and fall of influence. Take away the power and the cameras, and the camaraderie goes too. Al Simpson would know the sting of betrayal, but his true friends in the Senate were many and lasting.
He has these extraordinary range of different qualities that are appealing. I think you're struck probably, although he probably doesn't want to hear it, by his humor and his sense of life and fun. And as someone who, as the ninth member of a large Irish Catholic family, I'm always had to rely upon humor in order to be able to survive in that large family. And I think we sort of cooked, right, really from the beginning. Very, very different political philosophies. But what I found out very, very quickly was that Al Simpson was interested in getting things done for Wyoming. And he was interested in getting things done for the country.
He has the gift of talk and camaraderie and prerequisites for people in political life. But it's much more than that, I think, because he holds no grudges. If you have a knockdown argument with him about politics or an issue of the moment in the national spotlight, there's no hard feelings. There are no hard feelings about it afterward. I speak from experience because we've often differed sharply in our judgment of political questions or other politicians that he knows. And it's never personal. He is, in that way, it seems to me, emblematic of a kind of civility that has, alas, eroded in American political life.
One of Simpson's most cherished friends in Washington lived down the road from the Capitol, over on Pennsylvania Avenue. Some have called the presidency the loneliest job in the world.
Well, buck does stop there in terms of making decisions. But for me, it wasn't lonely because main thing was family, and then close friends, and Al Simpson was one of them.
They had met first when their fathers served in the Senate. Now each on his own had found power and fame in Washington, and they became trusted friends. In 1988, with President Ronald Reagan retiring and George H.W. Bush running to succeed him, there was talk of putting Simpson on the ticket for vice president.
Alan was on George Bush's short list. I know that for a fact since I was the chairman of the campaign. I think if George Bush had really been given his druthers, and if political positions and things like that had not entered in, he might well have picked Alan Simpson because they were so simpatico and they were such really good friends, and Alan was very effective.
And one of the reasons why Alan Simpson might be a good choice to be Bush's running mate. He's not famous. Wyoming has only 3 electoral votes, but he's smart, funny, irreverent, and tough.
And I said, let's just make a list here. Advantages and disadvantages of being Vice President of the United States. And being a very practical, agreeable girl, said, bigger house and somebody to do the laundry. Well, what are the disadvantages? He said, everything else. And I wrote down I would be at the funeral of every dead leader of the world. But then, at New Orleans, the signs were out there, Simpson, Bush. And 3 delegations said they'd walk out of the convention if I were the vice presidential candidate because of my position on abortion.
He was an old guard Republican when it came to balanced budgets and limited entitlements and strong defense. But he broke with social conservatives on issues involving gays and a woman's right to choose an abortion. By not joining the Bush ticket and remaining as whip in the Senate, in some ways he could help his friend more.
They're both liberal Republicans. They are the old-style Republican, which is a diminishing breed, alas, for our country. They had a love of the outdoors in common. They had a love of their families in common, and love of humor and music and horsing around.
Oh, we're just fiddling around one night, and there was this soft snow, one of those moist, soft snows. And George said, if you go off there was a room up there. It wasn't any secret room or anything. I mean, it was off of a playroom or something. He said, God, wouldn't you like to feel some snow in your hands again? I said, yeah, I was good at that. So he called the Secret Service. We stepped out on this little porch and hurled a couple of snowballs.
Yes, that was a great historic moment. We'd go up there and explore around, look around, and that was a rare moment because there weren't that much snow around there. But we had fun stuff like that. I mean, he'd come and spend the night, and then he'd get up at night and walk down all the different rooms and look at all the paintings and he just had this curious attention to history.
And he became a witness to history. Al and Ann Simpson were at the White House when Bush deliberated about sending troops to repel the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
There are protesters all over Lafayette Square. Bush is a killer. Bush, a warmonger. Got up and he pulled the curtain there in the dining room, small dining room. He said, look at that. He said, that tears me to bits. I've been in war. I know war better than any of those people. He said, because if I do this, he said, it won't be because I'm a warmonger. It's because we won't let this son of a bitch get away with stealing a whole country of Kuwait. That's what it was about.
In the next presidential campaign, in 1992, Bush got in trouble for signing into law a small tax increase after his Read My Lips pledge not to raise taxes. As the campaign faltered, Simpson was there.
And I went up to George's office and I said, this may be the end of our friendship. I said, I have to tell you these things, and I have written them down about the campaign and my affection for you, and it may really rupture that. Now, when you do that with George, he takes his glass and he wiggles him like, okay, what the hell you got on your mind? I said, don't be defensive. It is unbecoming. It's not like you. You've never been petty, not you. And you've never been ensnarled in self-pity. Never. What would you want them to remember even if you couldn't win? Let your decent self come forward. Say, this is who I am. I'm going to do whatever I deeply believe. I'm going to stop strategizing. Say what you know damn well is right. Don't give a damn if you lose. Don't think of losing the job. Think of doing the job.
And in the end, George H.W. Bush lost the White House. On the last evening there, dinner with the Simpsons.
George has a way of, when he's ready to go to bed, why, he just gets ready to go to bed. Like, you people can go home now, I'm going to bed. We said, boy, it's been a great run for us.
Very emotional time, but he was great.
Like George H.W. Bush, like every politician, Alan Simpson would suffer losses. With the media, for instance.
And they think, we let this guy get away with murder. We lost our objectivity with this cat, and now it's payday.
Simpson's view of the press might also have been less than objective, like his outburst defending Ronald Reagan over funding of the Contras in El Salvador with Middle East money.
He's off balance. You'd like to stick it in his gazoo.
But Simpson's temper reached new heights when Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas was accused of inappropriate conduct by a lawyer and colleague, Anita Hill.
Why in God's name would you ever speak to a man like that the rest of your life?
That's a very good question. And I'm sure that I can't not answer that to your satisfaction.
And Simpson's attacks got even harsher. He described stuff over the transom, statements from unnamed people saying, watch out for this woman. His sympathy was reserved for Clarence Thomas.
And I said, you have had your good name stripped from you. And he said, yeah. He said, I can't believe what's happened.
Nina Totenberg had broken the story of Anita Hill's accusations, and Simpson accused her of unethical journalism. They had a particularly heated exchange on television's Nightline, and Simpson confronted her again in the parking lot.
And the next thing I know, Al Simpson comes running out, waving something at me, and starts yelling at me about how I'd violated some sort of rules of ethics of some journalism code he had. And he's going on, and I finally lost my temper too, and I got up and I looked up at him. He's a lot taller than I am, and probably with a combination of fear and fury, I used a 4-letter word and told him he was a blankety-blank bully. Got back in the car, pulled the door shut, and said to the driver, "Get out of here." The driver turned around and he says, "Lady, you better get a gun."
I said, unbiased journalism, what a bunch of hogwash. She named me with a couple of marvelous expletives. She said, "You're a bully. People hate you. You don't know that this whole town hates you." And I said, "Well, they don't exactly. You ain't exactly the Rose of Picardy."
Simpson often relished a good fight, but he wasn't enjoying this one. Yet he couldn't seem to pull back.
As I speak of it now, I can almost feel my gut tighten because it was just the worst time of my life. And Ann said to me one morning, she came back, and I started out the door, and she said, "Come back here right now." I said, "Well, I'm busy. I gotta go. They're waiting for me." I had a driver then, assistant leader. She said, "I want to tell you something. I love you. Other people love you. You keep doing this, you're going to ruin yourself, and I'm just telling you, shut up." I said, "Shut up? You never said shut up to me before in our whole 30, 40 years it was then." She said, "I'm telling you now, just knock it off. You're just losing yourself."
He's not perfect, thank goodness. I think people understood with Al, you take the whole package. And, I think all of us have our limitations in one way or the other, and probably run at times against the grain, and I think that's part of the human condition.
If the press is notoriously fickle, senators are reputedly loyal and collegial, especially to someone like Al Simpson, who so many lawmakers described as a true friend. So it was a surprise when he lost the assistant leader position in 1995 to Trent Lott, a Mississippi senator.
Al was actually, I felt, more into substance and took some issues that cut both ways. And I really felt that as we were moving in those years toward the culmination of the Republican Revolution, which led to us having the majority throughout the 90s and into this century, that a more classic whip was what was called for.
I went over to Trent's desk one night saying, I said, "Are you running for assistant leader?" "Oh, no, I would never do that. You're a great assistant leader." So I'm fast asleep like the engineer at the switch.
I guess I was a little young and a little bit of an upstart.
And I grabbed old Trent the minute that I lost that by one vote. I said, I just got up in the caucus. I said, "Come on out of here, pal. We're going to go up to the print media right now. We're going to go up to the television. I'm going to tell them you're the new guy."
The Simpson who went out to meet the press with Trent Lott was the one beloved of colleagues and friends. The battle behind him, no grudges carried forward. His pattern was to seek reconciliation, even after the worst hostilities, whether it was with Trent Lott, Anita Hill, the Democrats across the aisle, or the media he demonized. But the Senate he loved was becoming a different place.
When I first went to Washington under President Ford back in 1975, people were able to disagree agreeably. The fact that you were a political adversary back in those days didn't necessarily mean you were also a political enemy. That's changed. Today it's ugly up there, very, very ugly, and politics is sort of a zero-sum game.
3 terms, 18 years in the U.S. Senate. That was enough for Al Simpson.
I said to Ann, You can come to the well once too often here, and I've pissed off the deadbeat veterans, and I've got the AARP after me, and I've got I got guys after me in every segment of Wyoming society. So I could see myself that last 2 years looking for the exit, not knowing what I was going to do.
Corporate boards beckoned, lucrative speaking engagements, and the Bobcat Ranch was waiting on the South Fork of the Shoshone River, east of Yellowstone. But Al Simpson would first enjoy an interlude in the Northeast, at Harvard, teaching at the John F. Kennedy School of Government and running the university's Institute of Politics.
I couldn't have got into Harvard if I'd picked the locks, and they asked me to come and teach. I said, hell, I can't, I've never taught anything. They said, yeah, but you have something to teach. So I gave a course for 4 spring semesters called The Creating of Legislation, Congress, and the Press.
Al ran that institute and was a beloved figure up there, and he knew more about the Boston Red Sox and the New England Patriots and the Celtics and the Boston Bruins, a great sports fan.
I took opera courses I'd never taken at the university while I was drinking beer at the Buffalo day and night. Annie took courses in British history. Her 2 great-grandfathers were in the British Army in India. We had a ball.
He's much more sophisticated than people know. He loves to go to Europe. He loves to go to great museums and art galleries. He loves being with sophisticated people and listening to them and learning.
Well, Ann and I, we love music, art, books. Those are the softening agents of life. If you don't have music or art, it doesn't count what kind, or books or things that civilize you. Politics is barbaric. If that's all you're interested in, it's barbaric.
The job at Harvard didn't pay a lot, but Simpson's speaking engagements did.
I was making speeches all over the country with Bryce, with Bradley, with Jim Carville. They'd line me up with all sorts of people. I think what we did finally exhausted all the organizations that have an annual meeting.
And there were seats on corporate boards with stock options.
I had plenty coming in and used it all for the benefit of the future, the ranch, this place, the kids, trust funds, and I was blessed.
There was never any doubt that they would return to Wyoming, to their home in Cody, and the Bobcat Ranch up the South Fork of the Shoshone River.
We always knew we would come back here, and of course the ranch has been a big pull for all of us. The children love it and come bring their friends here, and this is the place of our heart.
Truman said I tried never to forget who I was, where I came from, and where I'd go back to. That's a perfect description of Al Simpson.
And his life as a public servant and a public voice continues. He serves on the Commission on Presidential Debates. He campaigns for tort reform, improving writing skills for children, and public financing of political campaigns. When asked, he advises presidents.
I asked Alan to join us as a member of the Iraq Study Group because of his willingness to be upfront and honest, to say what he thinks, and I knew he didn't have any preconceived notions.
They gave us their recommendation as they saw fit. The president didn't follow that particular path. It was an honest effort to try to put together some bipartisan support for a common policy, common point of view.
And when another president called with another intractable problem, this time the federal deficit, Simpson answered again and brought with him his usual arsenal: camaraderie, humor, and undiplomatic candor. Whether it leads to reform or ends up on the shelf, Simpson and his co-chair, Erskine Bowles, have no regrets about the work they've put in. And Simpson may not be done yet.
I'll be starting the Lone Pine Nursing Home. Jeez, that's my new knee, for God's sake. No, I just keep going.
Yeah.
I had a grandmother that lived to be 100,
Dad lived to be 93, 95. Mom lived to be 93. Annie will live forever. You have a gorgeous person like that at your side, that adds life. Children, I don't think I'll do any more of these unless Erskine will fall for something.
But he'll be asked. I mean, you know, he's the kind of
So
leader
will
that's
you.
always going to be asked by
Well, so will
Republicans
you.
and Democrats.
And because it's the same thing with him. Integrity, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. Integrity, trust, humor. That's where the two of us have hit the nerve that has disappeared in Washington in these last years. Humor.
He had a delightful way of sort of pulling my chain on frequent. Sometimes when I get excited on the floor of the United States Senate, he'd just lean over and whisper to me, "Now, Ted, calm down a little bit." And somebody else did that, you'd turn around and might take a different action on it, but I just couldn't resist smiling and laughing and enjoying it.
It's something that's very much missed around here because for all his mercurial swings, there was a real human being behind them. And so much of Washington now is Simonized, sanitized, airbrushed, all the rough edges are burnished away.
He has been a wonderful husband, except when he hasn't been.
Production of this program was made possible by the generous support of the following. A complete list of supporters is available from PBS.